All right, so some interesting thoughts that have been going through my mind. Last night, I was thinking about the difference between fairness and ethics, because I think fairness is something that is more instinctive and hardwired into us. And ethics, well, although it is something that we have an instinct for, it's not, it's an expression of an instinct, so it can vary. What is ethical can be, vary from culture to culture. But fairness is something that is always tracked in a very similar sort of mathematical formula, predictable behavior. For example, I know that there's like monkeys. If you give one monkey like a grape and you give the other monkey something that is not as tasty as a grape, like all of a sudden, like the monkey who's not getting the grape he's gonna know that, and he's gonna know that the other monkey's getting a better piece of food, more delicious piece of food, and he'll throw a tantrum. And so fairness is something that seems to be fairly predictably present, and something that we're all of us are always like tracking. Okay, what am I getting? What are they getting? What am I doing? What are they doing? And so that's interesting. And that's sort of, where you start to see, we try to build our ethical systems based on, a foundation of fairness, but usually ethics make all of these, depending on what culture you're in, make all of these special situations where fairness is mitigated due to whatever circumstance is present. It's like we don't treat children the same way we treat adults. We don't treat a priest the same way we treat the congregation. We don't treat a president the same way we would treat a normal person, that is just like a blue-collar worker. We don't treat a college graduate the same way we treat a high school graduate. So, and that's ethics. That is ethical based on our society. It is, a lot of it is we learn through osmosis and through implication. But a lot of what we consider ethical is not actually fair from, the more basic, primitive way of viewing it. But we're, as a culture or as individuals within a culture, we're always sort of tracking, well, is this fair? And how unfair is this? Are we going to allow this to be before we decide to, before it turns into the straw that broke the camel's back? And now, you have a revolt against, or some kind of movement against something. Because ethics are often very unfair, So what is ethical does not equal what is fair. So I think that's interesting. Because, for example, in male-female relationships, the ethical considerations of previous generations was not, what we would call fair. It was something that was, decided upon, you have these roles and I have these roles, and you have these responsibilities and I have these responsibilities, you have these privileges and I have these privileges. So that was considered ethical, but it wasn't necessarily fair from, the more basic primate, tracking point of view. And, so whether that is right or wrong, I don't, that is not so much what interests me about it, because what is right and wrong, that's like another like question, because what is right and wrong is not necessarily what is fair. What is ethical is not necessarily what is right or wrong, So fairness, right and wrong, and ethical, these are all, they seem sort of, they're like seem to be part of some similar family, but they're actually very different from each other. And I don't know, it's just interesting to like detach these different parts of how we think and to see like how, what circumstances are at play and how do they actually function together and how do they coexist together. And a lot of people, I think, in nowadays world, people don't really think about these differences, these discrepancies, and there's a lot of confusion about, ethical, what is ethical, what is moral, what is right and wrong, what is fair, what is unfair. And it's just like this hodgepodge of unconsciousness because people don't make these distinctions and aren't able to like stand apart from the whole thing and I sort of identify, okay, well, what does this mean? And, in an isolated sort of way, what does this, different thing mean? What does this thing that we call one thing really mean? Are we calling one thing something that is actually really another thing? And then are we like confusing the two? Now, another thing that I thought, was interesting about fairness, and this one I haven't really like fully worked out how in my mind, but I think I came up with some mental like ethical habits of within myself that kind of made me have less clarity on it, but so maybe talking about it out loud will help me find what I was trying to like pin down with this. But I was thinking about how, and this is going to be a little bit more controversial than what I just said previously, but I was thinking about in male-female relationships, one of the things that is sort of like an aphrodisiac for both sexes, I think equally, like both sexes appreciate this, and it's sort of an aphrodisiac, is when we allow things to be unfair. Like when one person says, I'm going to give you more than what you deserve. I'm going to give you more than what you're giving me. And that's like a huge turn on for, like the recipient of that. And so I found that interesting. But in the back of our minds, even the person who's doing this, they can do that for a while, but their fairness tracker is not offline. Like that is still operating. What is fair, that is sort of like still operating in the unconscious. So, love will take place when we allow things to not be fully equal, and we don't allow them, we don't require them to be fully fair. There's a certain freedom within a relationship when things are not fully accounted for, and when we don't constantly are sort of competing for equality, and we're just sort of allowing to give what we want to give without like tracking it so tightly. Now, there is a part of us that is tracking it, and that part of us will activate if we start to feel like unappreciated, like what we're giving is not appreciated, and like if what we're giving doesn't really feel like it's received in a way that really honors that this other, that this is I am giving you more than what you're giving me, but it's not like really acknowledged in that, in a way, where it's like swept under the rug. It's like where one person is always putting out in a loving way, and the other person doesn't even like recognize, make note of that, and say, hey, oh man, this is so loving, this is so great, I'm getting this, and I don't even really deserve it, but they're giving it to me because they love me. And so when it's acknowledged, like then it feels very rewarding when you have things that are taking place within a relationship that aren't fully fair. But when it's not acknowledged, then the fairness part of our mind starts kicking in, and it's like, it's like, I gave this person all this love, and I did it without really expecting something in return, except for that I wanted it to be, I didn't want to feel like I'm being devalued, and now I feel like I'm being treated like, not that it was a gift, but that this person is owed this, like now you feel like you're like feeding a sense of entitlement instead of, giving something from your heart, and, where it's not something that is quid pro quo, I mean, you could say, you could make an argument for that there is some quid pro quo here, because you want that acknowledgement on some level, or, it doesn't even have to be like verbal acknowledgement. You could just see the person's reaction, that they appreciate it, like the appreciation, that they are happy with what they're receiving, essentially. Happiness is the greatest reward often, like when we do something for another person, just their happiness alone, that is a great reward. But it's not a fair exchange necessarily. It's not like they necessarily did anything to deserve it. It's just that we felt to give it. So I think, fairness, it's not, like sort of, so back to my original premise is that fairness is not allowing things to be unfair in a relationship is sort of an aphrodisiac in that sense. But, there's some, nuances that go into it. So anyway, some interesting things that I've been thinking about. Just wanted to like verbalize them and process them out loud, so that way they're more, deeply, wired into my neurocircuitry. Anyhow, it's always like helps me grow my way of thinking and my ability to articulate and verbalize my thoughts. Anyhow, have a good one.